Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for. The movie podcast to end all movie podcasts. A podcast that discusses and critiques the best of the best and the worst of the worst movies playing at a theater near you. With a host whose opinions have been deemed as fact by your favorite fact checkers. And that's a fact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the movie maestro, the tyrant of theater, the gumshoe of review, the man that makes theater employees and Hollywood execs shiver by his mere presence. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge, the jury, the sultan of cinema, Justin Henson. Welcome to the Movie Wire.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. We have a big show this week with 3 brand new reviews, with 2 playing in theaters and 1 now available to stream. This week on the show, a story of 2 ladies going south. Buckle up for Ethan Coen's Drive Away Dolls. While caring for her dying brother, a teenager strikes up a friendship with an eccentric activist played by Woody Harrelson in the Hulu original Suncoast. And finally, a stop-motion animator struggles to control her demons after the loss of her overbearing mother in stop motion. We have a lot to cover this week, so let's jump right in. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows to watch. A roar and a burst of flame. The Movie Wire podcast. You need people like me.
The Wire.
And here we go.
Jamie regrets her breakup with her girlfriend while Marion needs to relax. In search of a fresh start, they embark on an unexpected road trip to Tallahassee. Things quickly go astray when they cross paths with a group of inept criminals in the new Ethan Coen film, Drive Away Dolls.
Decayn, Santos.
Not on your life.
Hello, girls! It's the last body shot competition, so we are gonna salt you up.
I've had it with love. I don't believe it's relevant to the 21st century lesbian.
You're not wearing that.
I just came from work.
I came from Toledo. I don't dress like it.
I'm not here to peddle my wares. I'm leaving town.
I am too. That was my plan. Where are you going?
Tallahassee, Florida. I've been unhappy.
That's why we take this trip together, honey babe. We get our act together.
Curly's Drive Away, Pennsylvania's most trusted name in car delivery.
Curly here.
Don't call me Curly.
And your name, Curly?
My name is Curly. We just met. It's too familiar. We're here for the car. Wait a minute. You call with a drop-off in Tallahassee, and then these broads come in and say they're ready to go to Tallahassee. They drive the car instead of you. Is that bad?
Bad if they find the goods.
What? You should see what's in here.
I bet it's locked.
I understand that you're unhappy, sir. We will find and deliver the package.
We just want your friends. You cannot relate to the public, which in the service profession is a big handicap.
Did the 2 creeps find you?
They know we have their stuff. Maybe we sell it back. Shake them down.
Are they like wanted or something?
Oh no, they're not in trouble at all.
I'm gonna help you break a big murder case.
That is about the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I'm a cop.
Who are you?
Democrats.
Wow, you had a full day.
Dildos everywhere. I have never seen so many dildos in a movie. To the point during the halfway mark, I can hear our director and writer Ethan Coen say, "Cut! Not enough dildos in this shot." Ethan Coen, the man responsible for Raising Arizona, Barton Fink, Oh Brother Where Art Thou, No Country for Old Men, Burn After Reading, Bridge of Spies, has gone on a journey of films that require a unique taste of humor, like Hail Caesar from 2016 and 2019's The Jesus Rolls. And to his credit, I actually did like Hail Caesar, but we see a confidence in Coen as his comedic films progress, in attempting to be somewhat dry but edgy kind of humor. This hasn't really worked in the more recent years, and Drive Away Dolls, even though a better film than The Jesus Rolls, isn't a funnier film. During this movie, I had different visuals of Coen on the progress of this movie. I can picture Coen at his computer along with new writer Trisha Cook giggling at the screen, talking back and forth, saying, "You gotta write this down, write it down, this will be so funny, trust me." And sadly, it wasn't. What Coen and Cook don't realize is not the size of the dildo, but how you use it. I guess Coen didn't think that applied to movies. Coen's attempt at comedy solely banks on the mere props of sex toys and sexual scenes to try and generate a hook for the audience. But in complete fairness, if I were to stay somewhat professional in critiquing this film based on the techniques of the sex scenes are actually shot fairly well. And if Coen goes down this path of relying on props and situations that run like an inside joke to the filmmakers, he could make a killing in the porn industry. I mean, let's look at it. With all these porn knockoffs of popular characters or popular films, he could be the one filmmaker to really take these films to the next level. Ethan Coen makes an attempt at a very loose, almost grindhouse feel, but it seems like he's trying way too hard without a clear direction or vision of how to translate that to the audience. By adding some mild tone characters and some bizarre transition cuts that acts like an animated 70s psychedelic visual that just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And it feels like Coen didn't know how to transition some of these scenes, and he used stock footage from the studio's closet from the 70s. It just doesn't fit in a pre-Y2K timeline. The biggest problem I had with this film is that it comes across as a toned-down copycat from the set of a Tarantino film, mixed in with the unique humor from Coen that seemed to de-evolve over time in its characters. Now, our two main characters are Jamie and Marion, played by Margaret Qualley and Geraldine Viswanathan, who both give good performances here, and they are truly the highlight of the movie. The two play almost as a gay odd couple. One is a loose cannon and the other is way too uptight. The odd couple road trip formula isn't new, but I don't care. If you take the right talent, have the right chemistry, and of course the material to back up the talent and chemistry, then it doesn't matter if the concept is a repeat. But this is where the movie always feels like it's leading to something great, but then shines disappointment because the cast is good, the chemistry is good between Qualley and Viswanathan, but the material doesn't go far enough. The movie never truly matches what the cast is working so hard to want this movie to be. The dialogue just feels like it sets the scene to some truly memorable moments, but then it just flatlines and really goes nowhere. Then we just cut to sex scenes and even more dildos that, again, forgive me, there's no other way that I can think of phrasing it right now, so I'll just say it. That Ethan Coen doesn't even know how to use these dildos. He relies on the mere concept of these props. And here I can picture another visual because that was more entertaining than watching this actual movie. I could picture Coen in the director's seat saying, "Cut!" walking up to one of the dildos, giggling, and then running away back to his seat. Now, Qualley and Viswanathan, I have to say, I was utterly impressed with them because their performance kept me engaged in Drive Away Dolls. Even though the dialogue and the situations never materialized as interesting, their performances were. Now, moving on, as I just mentioned, the dialogue doesn't go far enough. So does what Coen is trying to tell the audience. The movie again is set pre-Y2K, and the movie sets itself up in the first act by setting the scene for welcoming in the new millennium. And there are multiple hints of the ignorance and hatred of homosexuality in the late 90s. And I wish I could say that Coen doesn't really have a theme here, but rather a reminder of how far we've come. And almost a nod to all the films from the past that we've had male road trip movies that we have seen over and over and over again. But he consistently reminds the audience of the ignorance, mainly from the dialogue from our main characters. But we don't really see any examples of that from anybody else, which leads into where the dialogue doesn't go far enough to explain what Coen is trying to portray. But if I were to ignore all the setups that led absolutely nowhere from Coen and Trisha Cook, I think it would have been more effective if we were consistently reminded of the ignorance, and we just accept that this is almost a sarcastic nod to all these male-led films that express their their male masculinity by hitting on women and trying to get laid on their road trip. These are two lesbians on a road trip that our main character Jamie that feels like each and every night she wants to get laid. It would have been one thing if our writers did something with the constant reminders of the mindset of ignorance of the late 90s and had a point to make, but again, it just feels thrown in and at times pointless. If we took away all the consistent reminders, this would feel like a pair of confident writers that wanted to take the road trip comedy in a fresh direction. But we lack any of the confidence, and it just feels like Coen and Cook have a concept and they're just throwing darts at the dartboard of ideas. This feels like a first draft of a script that was never revised. We then throw in the conflict, which is our girls finding a briefcase in the trunk of their car that they rented by accident from a trio of men that chase our girls through the movie to try and get this mystery briefcase back. Our goons are played by Joey Slotnick, who many in this movie will say, "Oh, that guy," who played in 1996 Twister and 2000's Hollow Man and the more recent bland action film Plane. We also have Manchester by the Sea CJ Wilson, and we get the performances that one would expect from two men that have spent their career as supporting characters. It's just enough to kind of just skate by. But in fairness, in their defense, again, these two don't have the material to work with or enough elongated screen time to really have their characters shine. This makes it for the chemistry to really never land or work itself out. And we do kind of see that at least with Kuala and Viswathan. This makes it to have an even deeper feeling of a tamer knockoff of characters from Tarantino films. Drive Away Dolls is like watching a horse race that you have money on. It gets a good send-off and the horse is running at a good pace to first place, but then it starts to get tired and it just starts to trot during the second to last lap and it loses its pacing. Until the last lap, it trips and falls, and you feel the utter regret of holding the betting form and the feeling of how much you spent on that damn horse, just like holding your movie ticket. I'm giving Drive Away Dolls 2 stars.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out reviews for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now.
Now available on video cassette.
A young woman is brought back to life by an unorthodox scientist in this Best Picture nominee, Poor Things, which is my second Best Picture pick of last year, receiving 4 stars. They only look like the perfect couple in Anyone But You, which was an innocent, smart, chaotic comedy surprise, receiving 3 stars. Plastic is Forever in this musical Mean Girls remake, which for a musical seemed to come across like plastic, receiving 2.5 stars. Every Good Thing in This World Started with a Dream in Waka, which was a fun and delicious musical treat, receiving 3 stars. The War on Earth will be decided in space in ISS, which had a fantastic premise, a beautiful presentation, but everything else needed to be pushed into the abyss of space and forgotten, receiving 2 stars. A novelist who's fed up with the establishment writes a book that propels him into the heart of hypocrisy in American Fiction, which had one of the best screenplays of the year, receiving 3.5 stars. And finally, Expose the Corruption, Protect the Hive in The Beekeeper. It was loud, it was mindless, but it was still kind of a lot of fun, receiving 2.5 stars. Make sure to check out those reviews of my previous episodes. Now, before we just jump right into the next set of reviews, there is a podcast that I absolutely love with a set of hosts that I absolutely love, and that's Decayn with the Boys. Let's hear from Decayn with the Boys now.
Welcome back to Judge Jordan. You know who it is.
Whoa, Matt. This isn't an episode. This is our promo.
Well, what's a promo?
It's to tell everybody about our podcast, Decayn with the Boys.
Oh, where you and I get together and talk about craft beer and combat sports and horror movies and whatever else is on our mind?
Yeah, from Buckle to Bell, we cover the best combat news in the biz.
Oh, yeah, we do that, don't we?
Yeah, every week.
Yeah, and you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, and on YouTube. We're at Decayn WTB on all social media, so catch us out there and have a beer with us. Cheers.
A stop-motion animator struggles to control her demons after the loss of her overbearing mother in the new horror film, Stopmotion.
Such a morbid imagination. Bringing dead things to life.
Hey, she emerges from her cave.
Hello.
When do you think you'll finish this film of yours?
I don't know.
What's all that stuff?
It's called stop-motion animation. What do you think?
It's a bit boring.
It's not finished. I mean, it's not boring.
Make a new one.
A new one?
Yeah. I know a better story. You want to hear it? There's a girl. She's scared. There's someone coming.
Who's coming?
The man no one wants to meet.
The Ashman.
You can bring it to life.
What does the Ashman do?
Don't be scared.
Whatever it is you think you saw back there, it's not real.
I don't want to make this film anymore.
Do you want to hear the next bit of the story?
I want to go. I want to go. What happens when it takes on a life of its own?
Now, originally I was going to have Ordinary Angels on the show this week, but as I walked into my after-hours screening at my local theater, I was met by the world's greatest projectionist / theater owner. He asked me if I'm sure I wanted to screen Ordinary Angels, and I stopped confused because this was a first for me, coming from him to see if I wanted to change my mind. I asked if there was something wrong with Ordinary Angels. He said no, but I have something better and a little bit more unique, and I had to stop because I'm not one to steer away from my schedule. And again, this isn't to say that Ordinary Angels is bad, because it will be on next week's episode. But my reasoning is I feel a small movie like this might get lost amongst all the other movies that are currently released, and it might not last by next week with Dune 2 flooding into theaters. And I really wanted to give this movie a shot because this one actually did seem interesting to me. Now, we tend to put our deepest thoughts into our work that we are passionate about, from music, painting, writing, to our main character, Ella Blake, played by Aisley Francosi, from The Last Voyage of the Demeanor, who puts her passion into stop-motion animation. Ella is filming a stop-motion picture with her intense micromanaging mother. Ella's mother, Suzanne, played by Stella Gone's only goal is to finish this film before she dies. Ella feels constrained by her mother's direction and does exactly what her mother says without saying a word. That is until her death while filming a scene where Suzanne instructs her to move a puppet a single millimeter, and then she tells Ella not to move a muscle in the process, where we see Suzanne breathe her final moment. By asking Ella not to move, not to breathe, not to turn around, was this the single act of humility of Suzanne not wanting her daughter to see her pass away? Or was it a matter of control to not have Ella see Susanna so weak? That will be up for the viewer's interpretation, but we don't get to spend too much time with our Ella and Suzanne dynamic to really know for certain without interpretation. But this does set up for Ella to finally be free from her mother's power grasp. Ella moves out of her mother's home and into an apartment to start anew and to finish the stop-motion movie that she started. This is where she meets an unnamed neighboring little girl played by Colin Springale, in which our director and writer alongside co-writer Robin King makes it pretty obvious for the viewer to understand what this little girl is to Ella. But out of respect to those that see it, I will leave that up for the viewer. Now, stop motion is one of those horror movies that really goes beyond depth and thought and really takes the viewer almost into a deep trance. This isn't a movie for those that just like the slasher genre or the cheap jump scares. This is much more. Director Robert Morgan, who has a true art of making an audience feel incredibly uncomfortable with his stop motion style, Morgan has really just stuck to doing short films, with this movie being his first full-length theatrical feature. And I can tell with his long list of stop motion shorts that this was a crescendo of his talent to this film. A lot of horror fans out there will probably remember his short in the ABCs of Death 2, where he was responsible for one of the most bizarre and unsettling shorts, Deloused, which was one that really stood out from the bunch of films. Morgan knows how to have such simplistic stop motion designs and knows exactly what to do with them to make me squirm in my seat. Now, when it comes to actually adding real characters with a mix of stop motion in this full-length feature, this was a true test for him, and I can see the challenge with such a deep theme he is trying to portray. As a writer between Morgan and King, the two do a decent job to balance just enough dialogue to help move the story along. But I can tell that Morgan really wanted the visuals of stop motion to really drive that emotional impact. And the balance does work here. The script didn't make this movie a mesmerizing, thought-provoking horror film, but it's rather this not being Morgan's first rodeo on how to translate his art of feelings through stop motion. And I have to say that the audio mix along with the art direction really does help create moments of unease. The technical achievement here is simplistic, but it's absolutely fantastic. The audio mix is at its top form here. Stop motion feels complex with an underlying feel of simplicity and storytelling, but it all mixes together to offer something unique when it comes to the elevated horror movie. But the big question is, will viewers find stop motion scary? That I'm not going to address because for me, it's hard to scare me in a movie, and no, I wasn't scared in this. But it is also hard for me to feel uncomfortable watching a movie, and this movie did make me feel uncomfortable. And this was part of Morgan's intent. When we dive into one's psyche, including past trauma obsession, there's a certain level of madness that can follow. And with madness, there is uncomfort. And Morgan takes us on this journey of madness with Ella. The one thing that does actually throw off the film is the progression of Ella's madness. I felt this wasn't consistent or clear on how deep her madness was going to transition. The first half of the movie, we get some great gradual pacing as we get to know Ella. And then the second half, we just go downward like a roller coaster into insanity. I felt this happen just like a light switch, and the use of the little girl to justify actions didn't go far enough to be proven symbolic to push Ella deeper into the abyss of her madness. But even so, holistically with this movie, this is the type of movie that will go under the radar. This is the type of film that will have a love it or hate it, with little in between. And this is also one of those movies that goes for one symbolic ending that will also have viewers saying they loved it or they hated it. Me, I didn't like the ending. I got it, I understood it, but it left me unsatisfied because I think our characters needed to give us something more to really justify that ending. I don't think it had an earned ending. I really wanted just a little bit more. But even though I didn't like the last 5 minutes, the rest of the film does work to gain a reaction when you leave the theater. I felt completely icky leaving the theater, but it also did stay in my head until the next day. And if I get a feeling like that, I say that Morgan's strategy worked, and that's effective filmmaking. Stop motion is truly an impressive feat when it comes to balancing stop motion dialogue messaging through some impressive audio visuals and moments that made me squirm in my seat. The dark, uncomfortable feel of stop motion sent me an unease feeling during the entire runtime, and the characters made me incredibly uncomfortable. Stop motion mesmerized me in thought and made me feel completely gross leaving the theater. That's what Robert Morgan does best, and it's a mission accomplished. I'm giving stop motion 3 stars. Now, if you haven't tuned in, follow or subscribe to the Cultworthy and the Movie Wire's new show, Back to the Balcony, now is your time because this week, me and Antonio cover the 1980s film, Batteries Not Included, and the Siskel and Ebert reviews that followed. You won't believe what these two have to say and our response to them. Let's hear a sneak peek now.
Your host Antonio of the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. Blame E.T., man. E.T. is what did that for us. It put us in that mood. It put us in that particular mindset of we are going to have some sci-fi fantasy, but also we're going to talk about human emotions, family dynamics, things that are relatable, and being able to tell a sci-fi and sometimes horrific story within that. And I think this is one of those films that perfectly encompasses it. Back to the Balcony on YouTube and your favorite podcasting platform. Join us.
Sound a little excited, Jane. Sound less excited, Roger.
While caring for her brother along with her audacious mother, a teenager strikes up a friendship with an eccentric activist who is protesting one of the most landmark medical cases of all time. In the Hulu original, Suncoast.
You want to be a normal teenager. I got news for you. You're not normal, Doris.
Who's Doris?
I am.
Do you think this is the right place for him?
You'd say that about any place. My brother's dying. He hasn't talked in years.
I'm so sorry. My wife passed away.
My dad died when I was 3.
Christ, it ain't a competition.
I think I should start sleeping at Suncoast so your brother doesn't get too lonely. He's my child. When he's in pain, I'm in pain.
I'm your child, too. What about
God's
my pain?
sake, give me a break.
You can come to my house if you need a place to party. My mom won't be there, and you can do whatever you want.
Oh my God, I have to tell everybody. Who are you?
Everyone says this neighborhood is scary, but like when you're in it, it's like not that scary.
Thank you. It's really hard taking care of sick people. Sometimes you need a break.
I dare Nate to kiss Doris.
He could have died, and you weren't here.
Once your brother's gone, he's gone. And you will miss taking care of him. You'll miss everything. All the good, all the bad.
We're gonna have fun again, you and me. I'll learn how to be fun again.
Doris, old lady's name.
It was my grandma's name.
Oh.
She died the day I was born.
My God, is there any conversation with you that is not, like, thoroughly depressing? I mean...
Now, Suncoast is one of those with a powerful cast and topics that looks like a small film but plays like a pure emotional ride that wants to not just tug at your heartstrings, but rather attempt to climb all the way up to your tear ducts and forcefully open up the floodgates and ride the tears in hopes to reach awards time. Suncoast stars Nico Parker from the Disney live-action remake of Dumbo as Doris, who has had a lot of loss in her life, from the loss of her father to preparing for another loss of her brother, who doesn't have long to live from brain cancer. The only two in this family that can communicate now is Doris and her mother, Christine, played by Laura Linney. But the two have tremendous tragedy that they refuse to address. From Doris being a teenager that had to grow up way too fast and miss a lot of her childhood to help care for her brother, to Christine that has to struggle being a one-income household, attempting to work and try and raise a daughter and care for a son that's dying. Our mother-daughter hold feelings in almost as each one holds an amount of guilt in for how the other one is feeling, which turns into a mother-daughter relationship that loses any emotional connection because of how emotionally drained and disappointed each one is in their life. Now, Suncoast seems like a pretty cut-and-dry emotional grab to attempt to make the viewer cry, and it does this extremely well, by the way. But what makes this different from any other movie that surrounds a main conflict around the tragedy of death of a loved one is that the movie doesn't make this the main conflict. Our tragedy is a sub-conflict that amplifies our main conflict, which the main conflict is how we deal with tragedy when we come face to face with it. But going even deeper than that, by the end of the movie, even though the movie doesn't hide what's going to happen, we know exactly what's going to happen. I was left with the question of, am I crying over the mere subject of death, or the mere question of, when faced with tragedy, how do we make decisions? How can we question our moral intent of making decisions? Is there even a right decision to be made? And can we be there for everybody when facing a tragedy internally and still take care of oneself? These are relatable conflicts that people around the world have to face each and every day. Suncoast doesn't just bring the topic of death to the table, but cleverly brings thoughts of the human nature of processing tragedy, and it does so with confidence of being true and honest of just being human. There is a scene in the movie where you have Doris in school in a classroom where the class is in a discussion on a piece of literature, and Doris speaks up to give the point of view around those that have not faced tragedy, and asks the question, can you justify actions for those that are not facing tragedy? Who is to say what's morally right if you're not the one looking tragedy right in the eyes and you're the one to have to make a decision on not just what will make others happy, but you have to speak on behalf of the one suffering? It's a brilliant speech, it's a relatable speech, and Doris makes some good points. Suncoast earns its emotional reactions through having the viewer question and even reflect to think about what they would do in Doris and Christine's situation. We have two generations from teenager to adult that have to face the world and make decisions. What a teenager would make and what an adult would have to make. It attacks both sides with tough questions that any viewer can relate to. We also get supporting characters that support each of the tragedy-stricken characters. Doris has Paul, played by Woody Harrelson, who is an activist protesting the Suncoast living facility, in which Doris' brother is living his last days. The protest involves the topic of a patient living there where the decision has to be made if they continue to live or not, which is the moral driver to this movie's theme of who decides what morality is. Now, even though Paul is part of the protest and Doris is with her brother in the living facility, these two sides are complete opposites, but it never becomes a conflict. Paul sees the struggle with Doris and acts more of a symbol of humanity than a protester. He's there to fill in the gap of guidance where nobody else will. He's a symbol of just being human, of being there, being in the emotional element. It's a very sweet segment. And then we get a secondary character, Sue, a grief counselor played by Pan Daughtry, who attempts to break down walls of communication with Catherine. Each one of these supporting characters acts as almost a moral compass to guide our main characters, but even though the performances by Harrelson and Daughtry are phenomenal, these characters can also act as a fault in the movie, where they seem to not have enough substance to really push that narrative, and at times given other individual scenes that we have Doris and Catherine in, where they present some pretty smart dialogue that really better proves the messaging, it almost makes the Harrelson and Daughtry characters seem irrelevant given the limited screen time they have. And by the time we get to the climax, it became clear that these characters were merely a ploy to give that last feel-good moment at the end of the film. Harrelson and Daughtry, when they're on screen, are memorable, and it's sweet, and it's likable. They add almost a sigh of relief of a feel-good moment in between the tragedy elements. But between Lenny and Daughtry, this is where the chemistry lacks or can be a little too brief compared to our other chemistry. This is where the movie does feel a little off balance. But this isn't enough to derail the movie. When it comes to a movie that faces tragedy through the eyes of two generational women, Suncoast does a fantastic job on creating a story that feels real, it feels honest, and those facing the stresses of making moral decisions, including how to live life during difficult times, may feel a relatable relief to know there is no right decision, there is no wrong decision, and there is no way to tell the future of what's to come. Suncoast has its flaws, but it is truly a sweet film that will make you wonder if you're crying out of the pure tragedy idea or the relief of knowing that if you have ever experienced a moment of tragedy, that you are not alone in knowing what decisions to make, whether they're right or wrong. I'm giving Suncoast 3 stars. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Blue Sky, X Thread, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And make sure you check out our brand new show. Follow and subscribe to Back to the Balcony. Until next week, do me a favor. Make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film and support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at Movie Wire Show or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.